This is breaking news concerning a major geopolitical development that redefines the future of American strategy in the Arctic. We are receiving reports and in-depth strategic analyses indicating a profound shift in the narrative surrounding the United States' interest in Greenland, a story that was once dismissed as a diplomatic gaffe, but has now evolved into a critical national security paradox. New intelligence assessments and economic patterns suggest that Beijing is not only anticipating a renewed American push for the island territory, but counterintuitively, maybe strategically positioning itself to benefit from it. This changes everything we thought we knew about the power struggle for the Northern Hemisphere. Moments ago, discussions in Washington and Brussels began to reflect a startling realization. The narrative of purchasing Greenland is no longer just about resource acquisition or expanding American borders. It has morphed into a high-stakes psychological operation where the United States risks walking into a carefully laid diplomatic trap. The breaking development here isn't a signed check or a handshake in Copenhagen. It is the sudden, jarring awareness among Western allies that China's silence on the matter has been weaponized. While the U.S. debates the absurdity or the audacity of the purchase, Beijing has been playing a different game entirely, one that relies on American ambition to fracture the very alliances that keep the North Atlantic Treaty Organization together. We are looking at a situation that experts are calling a sovereignty paradox. If the United States moves to acquire Greenland, treating an autonomous territory as a real estate transaction, it validates a worldview that China has been pushing for decades, that sovereign land is a commodity, and that influence can be bought by the highest bidder. This is breaking news because the Greenland Purchase is no longer a hypothetical scenario for cable news debates. It is being viewed as a potential catalyst for a new Cold War in the Arctic, one where the U.S. might win the land but lose the moral high ground essential to checking Chinese expansion in the South China Sea. This story is developing rapidly as analysts parse through the economic data coming out of the Arctic Council member states. What we are seeing is not just a scramble for resources, but a scramble for the narrative control of the 21st century. The question that is suddenly dominating backroom channels in D.C. is no longer, can we buy Greenland? The urgent breaking question is now, why does our biggest rival want us to try? To understand the gravity of this moment, we have to look past the headlines and step into the silent, freezing reality of the Arctic Circle. For years, this region was considered a frozen wasteland, geopolitically dormant and protected by its own hostility. But as the ice recedes, it has revealed a chessboard that the world powers are rushing to control. The story didn't start today, but the realization of the trap, the paradox, is brand new. It requires us to rewind the clock and look at the moment the world laughed, while one nation started taking notes. When the idea of purchasing Greenland was first floated publicly by the American executive branch in 2019, the global reaction was immediate and visceral. It was met with shock in Copenhagen, confusion in Nuuk, and ridicule across much of the mainstream media landscape. The concept seemed archaic, a relic of 19th century imperialism where nations traded territories like playing cards. It was dismissed as an erratic impulse, a diplomatic faux pas that would blow over with the next news cycle. The world moved on, believing the book was closed on the matter. However, in the halls of power in Beijing, the reaction was starkly different. There was no laughter. There was calculation. While Western commentators focused on the absurdity of the proposal, Chinese strategists saw an opening, a crack in the transatlantic armor. They understood something that many in the West missed. The mere suggestion that the United States viewed a European territory as a purchasable asset created deep anxiety in the European Union. It signaled a shift in American foreign policy from alliance first to transaction first. For a rising superpower looking to displace American hegemony, this was not a joke, it was a gift. This brings us to the quiet, methodical expansion that has been happening in the shadow of this diplomatic noise. While the U.S. debated the optics of buying the island, China was already there, not with offers of sovereignty, but with the concrete tools of influence, infrastructure, mining contracts, and scientific expeditions. They declared themselves a near-Arctic state, a term that has no basis in geography, but immense weight in strategy. They understood that you don't need to buy the land to own the future of the region. You just need to control the flow of what comes out of it. The paradox we are uncovering today lies in the rare earth minerals buried beneath Greenland's melting ice sheet. It is estimated that this island holds enough neodymium, praseodymium, and dysprosium to power the global transition to green energy and sustain the military-industrial complex for decades. Currently, China controls the vast majority of the global supply chain for these critical minerals. If the U.S. were to successfully buy Greenland, or even aggressively force a protectorate status, it would theoretically secure these resources for the West. But here is the catch, the mechanism of the trap. Developing these mines in the harsh Arctic environment is incredibly expensive, environmentally devastating, and technically complex. China knows that the political cost for a Western democracy to tear up the pristine Arctic landscape is astronomically high. Environmental groups, indigenous populations, and European allies would revolt against Washington. By encouraging or silently supporting the U.S. ambition to own Greenland, Beijing pushes the U.S. into a quagmire. They are effectively baiting the United States into becoming the villain of the Arctic story. Furthermore, the diplomatic fallout creates a wedge that money cannot fix. Denmark is a NATO ally. Greenland is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. For the U.S. to aggressively pursue this acquisition implies that NATO allies are subordinate to American strategic interests. This feeds directly into Chinese propaganda efforts in Europe, which argue that the U.S. is not a partner, but a hegemon. If China can convince Europe that the U.S. is a threat to their sovereignty, the transatlantic alliance fractures. A fractured NATO is the ultimate strategic victory for Beijing, far more valuable than any rare earth mine. There's another layer to this onion, one that touches on the very concept of international law. We must look at the precedent this sets. The United States has spent decades policing the world based on the principle of self-determination and the inviolability of borders. We have stood against Russia, IS annexation of Crimea and China, artificial island building in the South China Sea. The argument has always been, you cannot just take what you want because you are powerful. If the United States creates a modern framework for purchasing a semi-sovereign nation, it effectively legitimizes the commodification of territory in the 21st century. It hands Beijing a powerful whataboutism card. If the U.S. can buy strategic depth in the Arctic to protect its national security, why can China not buy? Or coerce reintegration of territories it considers vital to its own security? The moral argument evaporates. The rules-based international order, which the U.S. built and maintains, relies on the consistency of its architect. By breaking the taboo of territorial purchase, the U.S. inadvertently signals that the rules have changed. And in a lawless world, As we dig deeper into the intelligence reports surrounding the Arctic infrastructure, the picture becomes even clearer. A few years ago, a Chinese state-owned construction company was the frontrunner to build 3 new international airports in Greenland. It was a deal that made economic sense for Nuuk, but terrified Washington. The Pentagon panicked, realizing that Chinese control over Arctic aviation hubs would be a disaster for North American defense. The U.S. pressured Denmark to block the deal and fund it themselves. This event was a turning point. It proved to Beijing that the U.S. is reactionary. They learned that they can dictate American foreign policy simply by bidding on a project. They act, and the U.S. reacts. Now, amplify that dynamic to the purchase of the entire island. If China subtly signals that they might be interested in a closer partnership with an independent Greenland, the U.S. reaction would be to accelerate its own aggressive acquisition attempts. China pulls the strings, and the U.S. dances, potentially overextending itself financially and diplomatically in a region where the environment is the ultimate enemy. We also have to talk about the human element, which is often lost in these high-level geopolitical assessments. The people of Greenland, the Inuit population, are not merely bystanders in this global chess match. They are the pieces being moved. The drive for independence in Greenland is strong, but it is tempered by the economic reality of the block grant they receive from Denmark. The U.S. purchase offers often come with promises of massive financial payouts to every citizen, a dangling carrot designed to bypass the Danish government and appeal directly to the voters in Nuuk. This is where the situation becomes volatile. If the U.S. fosters internal division within Greenland, pitting those who want the American payout against those who value their Danish connection or total independence, it destabilizes the very region it seeks to secure. A destabilized Greenland is vulnerable. And history shows us that when a strategic region becomes unstable and Western powers bicker over it, external actors like China step in as the neutral economic partner, offering stability without the baggage of colonial ownership. They don't need to buy the land. They just need to buy the loyalty of the people who live there, one infrastructure project at a time. The economic paradox is equally striking. The cost of buying Greenland is not just the sticker price, which would likely run into the trillions if one were to calculate the net present value of the resources and the strategic location. The real cost is the liability. Greenland is on the front lines of climate change. The infrastructure requires constant maintenance against shifting permafrost. The social services for the population are expensive. By keeping Greenland under Danish sovereignty, the U.S. currently enjoys the security benefits of the Thule Air Base, without the massive economic burden of running the country. Why, then, does the narrative of purchasing it persist? And why does China want it to persist? Because every dollar the U.S. spends trying to integrate an Arctic island is a dollar not spent on shipbuilding in the Pacific. Every diplomatic hour spent smoothing over relations with offended Danes is an hour not spent building coalitions in the Indo-Pacific. It is a classic diversionary tactic. Beijing is effectively cheering for the U.S. to win a prize that will weigh it down, distract its leadership, and tarnish its reputation among the European democracies. This brings us to the ultimate consequence of this geopolitical gamble, the risk of a Pyrrhic victory. In military strategy, a Pyrrhic victory is a success that comes at such a devastating cost that it is tantamount to defeat. If the United States were to force a purchase or a heavy-handed protectorate status over Greenland, it might secure the physical territory, but it would almost certainly lose the diplomatic war for the global South. China has spent decades cultivating an image in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia as a partner that respects sovereignty, contrasting itself against the history of Western imperialism. By treating a nation as a commodity, Washington would hand Beijing the ultimate propaganda weapon to cement its alliances in the developing world, effectively trading influence over billions of people for an island of 56,000. Furthermore, the fixation on territorial ownership ignores the changing nature of modern power, and we are no longer living in the era of the Louisiana Purchase or the acquisition of Alaska. In the 21st century, power is not defined solely by where your flag flies, but by who controls the data, the trade routes, and the standards of technology. China's Polar Silk Road initiative is not just about shipping lanes, it is about laying the fiber optic cables that will carry the world's data across the Arctic. While the U.S. argues over surface rights and land deeds, Chinese firms are quietly working to dominate the digital and logistical layer of the Arctic. The paradox is that the U.S. could own the ground, while China owns the connectivity that makes the ground valuable. We must also consider the silence of the landscape itself. The Arctic is an unforgiving judge of human hubris. It is a region that requires cooperation to survive, let alone prosper. Search and rescue operations, climate monitoring, and safe navigation in the high north are impossible without cross-border collaboration. By turning Greenland into a fortress of American exclusivity, the U.S. risks shutting itself out of the cooperative frameworks that actually govern the region. An isolated America in the Arctic is a blind America. If we push our allies away and antagonize our rivals to the point of breaking communication, we lose the eyes and ears necessary to monitor the very threats we are worried about. As the ice sheets retreat, revealing the rocky, mineral-rich earth beneath, the desire to possess Greenland becomes a mirror reflecting the anxieties of a superpower. It reflects a fear that the era of absolute American dominance is melting away alongside the glaciers. But the solution cannot be to desperately grab at the map. The trap Beijing has set is one of distraction and moral compromise. They are betting that the United States is so fearful of losing its status that it will betray its own values to keep it. They are waiting for the moment the U.S. signs the check, validating a world order where might makes right, a world order where China is perfectly positioned to thrive. The story of Greenland is not really about Greenland at all. It is a test of American wisdom. The paradox is that the only way to truly secure Greenland is to stop trying to own it and instead empower it as a sovereign partner within a strong Atlantic alliance. To buy it is to break the system that protects us. To respect it is to strengthen the shield against authoritarian expansion. As the sun sets over the Davis Strait, casting long shadows over the small, colorful houses of Nook, the world watches and waits. The ice is cracking, shifting, and changing every day. The geopolitical ground beneath our feet is doing the same. The question remains, will the United States navigate this new reality with the steady hand of a leader? Or will it grasp for control only to find it has grasped the bait? The answer will define not just the future of the Arctic, but the moral trajectory of the West for the rest of this century. And in the cold silence of the North, the most dangerous move might be the one we are most tempted to make.